you've got a society where 6 in 10 people no longer prescribe to any particular faith.
Don't do this unless it's useful for you.
As a Muslim, I believe that as believers, we must deal benefit to the world.
You got to figure this out. Like, you got to figure this out and be more specific.
If all of our solutions are for Muslims, then for me, we've missed the trick.
Grant making is kind of decision making by its very nature.
And this is where grant making gets really interesting, because in grant making, there's a really strong power imbalance.
How do you make good decisions?
There is, believe it or not, such a thing as overburdening a charity with funding.
It's as risky like an investment would be.
You can't just walk in and become a charity leader.
How do you view failure?
So one of the challenges faced by Muslim projects is accessing grants from mainstream grantmakers.
So how are you stopping that happening?
You're trying to generate impact for humans with money.
There's nothing wrong with the person who comes to an interview, gets nervous, has a bad interview, but then goes off and is doing amazing work.
Like, there are people out there essentially who are serving, they see a problem in their community and they're out there just responding to it.
Now then, in today's episode, I have a chat with Rizwan Yusoof. Rizwan is the Executive Director of Funders in Good. Funders in Good is a grant-making charity that supports and funds Muslim-led social good organisations in the UK. Gives them funding, gives them mentorship, gives them support, helps them with governance, helps them with all the stuff that they need to become a strong, sustainable organisation. In this episode, we have a chat about power imbalances. So Rizwan's thinking on, the system and the power imbalances within it when it comes to grant makers and people who are applying for grant funding. We also have a chat about what grant makers generally are looking for or should be looking for, and what practices are a bit old school that need to be modernised across the sort of grant making organisations generally. And we talk about how Rizwan's own faith, Muslim faith, feeds into his decision making when it comes to leading Funders in Good. So grab a brew. I hope you enjoy the convo. See you in a bit.
Rizwan, thank you for coming on to Causes.
Thank you so much for having me, dude. So good to see you again.
Yeah, really good to see you. So one of the things I want to do with this episode in particular is, like, if there are people who are watching in the charity sector, a lot of those people will be involved in applying for grants and things like that. And when I think about, like, a grant making expert, I think about you. And one of the so I kind of want to give people a like an insight into the mind of a grant making specialist. So that's what we'll try and focus on. And we'll do that through, like, a bit of your journey, what you're working on now, stories that you've sort of picked up along the way. So just start how we start all of these. Give us a 1-minute intro to your sort of upbringing, work, life. Like, who are you for people who
am I? So I've got 3 sisters and brother. I live in Walthamstow, which is like northeast London. It's quite bougie now, actually. It's quite a nice part of that, but it wasn't when I was growing up. So it was pretty working class, pretty rough, if I'm honest. But it's kind of become quite nice in recent years. So I did the usual thing, normal state kind of secondary school, went to college, but I decided that after college that uni wasn't for me. I wanted to jump into the world of work. So me and a few friends kind of set up a kind of adult learning company, like a company to help adults with, like, basic skills and so on. And then I had that itch of going to uni. So I went to uni as a mature student, and I did what most Asian kids do, which is like a science degree. So I have an undergraduate degree in network computing. After that, I decided to not to do anything to do with computing, and joined a friend who had a charity called Gift of Knowledge. We were giving scholarships out. Then I joined National Zakat Foundation, which I met you. So I was the director of services there. While I was at NZF, in the evenings, I went and did a master's in grant making and social investment. at CAS, and then 2.5 years ago, I joined Funders in Good. So I can tell you all about that with it.
Yeah, amazing. Give us well, first of all, but before we get into Funders in Good, talk to me, because I was just sort of browsing the website of Funders in Good, and then obviously we met at NZF. So tell me about how faith feeds into your work.
Faith is at the really the center. If you think of our vision at Funders in Good is a flourishing commitment to God. That's what we want to see in society, essentially. So I guess we see that as really important, and especially in the society we currently live in right now. We've got this world. Well, if you look at Britain, the UK at the moment, you've got a society where 6 in 10 people no longer prescribe to any particular faith, right? So for people of faith, I think it's even more important that they kind of are working in that sphere, in that space, to kind of revive almost the idea of belief in God and so on. So it's very much at the center of what we do. And everything we do is contributing to this idea that how do we make this idea of believing in God or committing to God flourish in society, right? So that's kind of what we're doing. And I can tell you more about that separately, perhaps. Well, I can jump in if you like.
Jump in if it's on your mind, jump in. Yeah.
Well, look, basically the idea is we've got a Muslim community which is relatively young, it's like 50 years old, 56 years old, as a migrant community. There were Muslims before that, but a major migration came over in the 60s and 70s, right? And I suppose what we had was a new migrant community. And the first generation basically came together to respond to those needs at the time. So they needed somewhere to pray, so they got together and sorted out mosques. They needed somewhere to eat, so they gave us like a lot of halal food, right? They kind of got that down, right? And they need somewhere to be buried, so they got places to be buried and so on, right? So it was like the basics were they needed that, they dealt with that, right? And they also had a mindset that they were going to go back home, or back home was wherever they came from, if you like, right? Speaking for my parents' kind of experience anyway. Then there's me, second, third generation, where, as I've said before, back home is Walthamstow, right? So for me, I'm just from here, grew up here. But we also have needs as a community, but they've changed, they've moved on, right? So we no longer need so many mosques. What we really need is provision and services that are going to respond to the needs of our community, but also now as a more confident community starting to offer solutions to the wider world, right? So, and that's something that's taking time, but that's really important to me, because as a Muslim, I believe that as believers, we must be of benefit to the world, right? So if we don't offer, if all of our solutions are for Muslims, then for me, we've missed the trick. So I think that's what Funders in Good is there to do: support the community, but also serve that wider society.
Yeah. So I mean, you've got into this sort of vision, philosophy kind of thing, but just for people who haven't heard of Funders in Good, like, what is it? What are you doing on a day-to-day?
So essentially, we build capacity in Muslim charities, and so the idea is that we see a community where there are people out there essentially who are serving. They see a problem in their community, and they're out there just responding to it, and doing something amazing to respond to that need. But usually, what we found is that, even this is coming back from many years now, what we found is that a couple of things. One is that they don't necessarily have the natural competencies for being like a charity lead, right? And by the way, you can't just walk in and become a charity leader, right? Well, you can, but basically you learn on the job and so on, right? So there's certain competency issues. So that's one thing, if I'm honest. The other thing is that there's funding out there, but it's usually highly restricted, and it's like really, kind of like specific to a particular project and a timeline, right? What that does is these charities tend to kind of go from project to project, right, and looking for funding for no funding. So and what that means is that they can't really they can't think big. When you're just constantly going, in that cycle of where's the next pound coming, and how am I going to have a job after this one? you can't think big. So what we said was we want to break those cycles. We want to change that. So we said, if we're going to back you, we're going to give you patient funding. We're going to be there to support you over several years, but we're also going to give you a lot of strategic support. So we're going to give you training. We're going to give you, if you need an accountant, we'll give you an accountant. If you need a strategist, we'll give you a strategy consultant. So the idea is that over time, you're building resilience and kind of sustainability into organizations, rather than organizations which are just about, surviving.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Patient funding is a really, you've sort of preempted one of the questions I've got with patient funding. But for me, like it's there's a lot of parallels with what you're doing. So you're a charitable, you're a charity yourself. Funders in Good are a charity. And correct me if I'm wrong, but so you're building a network of donors who, like, sort of high I guess high gift giving donor, like they're giving decent sort of chunks of money to philanthropy kind of injections, I suppose. And then your Funders in Good is kind of like the Y Combinator
you could say that, yeah. So we're like a fund, right? So the idea is, and sorry, I guess I didn't kind of cover that properly, but the way we generate resources for Funders in Good and the ventures, we call them social ventures that we're backing, if you like. The way we do that is relatively unusual because you can't come to the Funders in Good website and there's no donation button. You can't click and say, hey, can I here's £100 or here's £1,000 or I want to set up a direct debit. It's, if you want to join this, you're joining a community of funders, right? So there's a sense of you have to almost apply to be a funder at Funders in Good, right? And there is a lower threshold. So the minimum you can give is £3,000 a year. Okay, our average is about 6K, and probably our highest is 50K, right? So people are giving that kind of contribution. Most of our funders are just professionals. They're corporate workers. They're doing amazing work in their own kind of commercial. And what they're seeing is an opportunity to have strategic change through our work, right?
Yeah,
and I suppose also we're giving them the experience of like an investment, but in the charity world. I think that's really important to us because we don't want people just give a donation and forget about it. The idea
it's
is
super interesting.
Yeah.
Like it feels it's like a blend of different worlds of the sort of startup tech investment, venture capital type thing with this social good. So what are you looking for in the projects, the charities, the organizations that you're sort of helping support over the long term?
Yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to deciding who we're going to back, so what we did was last year we built something called a Social Venture Academy. It's a 6-month program, 8 venture areas where we do workshops, training. It's a classic kind of capacity building program, and essentially that's our pipeline. Because what we realized was that actually when we looked out there, the pool of people, not ventures, people that we felt that we could back wasn't as big as we thought it might be, right? So the number one thing is when you're making that decision about who to back, it's actually, sometimes we think about charities sort of as nondescript entities, but actually they're just a bunch of people, So the question probably that comes up, can we back them, those people, or that person, to do what they want to do and achieve great things? And that's why we built kind of academy. So that's the number one thing. Can you and it's actually again similar to this kind of VC world, venture capital world, where you back the team, not necessarily the idea is going to be good, but you want to know if the team can do it.
Yeah. The horse and jockey. That's how I've heard this described before. It's like you're betting on the jockey, not the horse.
Yes.
Because the horse, like you could be like. So I guess I'm curious from the parallels of an incubator tech kind of thing. Like are you saying then you're backing the founders or the team or the team of people, and then if they pivot in a way that tech sometimes pivots, you're on board with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are, we're very much about, looking at that team and understanding what's their track record. Can they deliver this thing? Actually, we've been going for a few years. We actually starting to see some of the people we worked at right at the beginning starting to actually take on other roles, and we're saying, okay, where are you going? Because we'd love to see what you're doing next, and whether we can back you in that one, So what we've done is built not only ventures but just leaders, people who know their stuff, who have gone through a little bit of pain, as all leaders do, but they're ready to take on new challenges. So,
who then probably become, so I don't know what, the funders over time as well. Probably.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'd like to think so. But that's another point. A lot of our funders really love getting involved, so they give the funding, they give a bit of support, but these guys are strategists and accountants and doctors and whatever, and they want to volunteer, they want to give pro bono support, right? But they don't want to walk out with a bucket and raise money for you. They want to just do something that's connected to their work, right? So a lot of our funders get involved and actually support our ventures and kind of build up their work as well. So that's
which
really
in many ways is like as or more important than the money that they might give.
And if I'm honest, and this between me and you and everyone else that's listening to this, but like that's the number one way of retaining a funder is if they help out.
Got you.
Right.
Yeah.
So because there's a sense of ownership and connection, and they actually understand what's going on.
Yeah. And want to see it through as well. Like there's an element. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So, so when someone gets involved, I'm like, they're not going anywhere. They're hanging around. Yeah, it's been pretty good.
That's wicked. Yeah. So you've been at Funders. You're not a founder, but you started it. You were the first executive director, and were there from pretty early on. How did you? What drew you in?
So I mean, a lot of So there was 3 founders that kind of started the project about a year and a bit before I actually joined as like a full-time exec director. Mm-hmm. One of them was my former CEO at NZF. So at National Zakat Foundation, I experienced grant making with projects and so on, and saw firsthand some of those challenges, right? So as I mentioned earlier, around that restricted funding, around lack of competency and so on, all the challenges they were seeing. So Funders is Good was just a natural solution to that. So actually, there is a way that we can actually break those cycles and actually, support these guys without them having to come cap in hand every year for that same buck, basically. So that was it. Yeah. How it came about.
What did you take with you, do you think, to help you in the role you're in now at Funders and Good from NZF?
So I think firstly, there was that one of the things I learned was that a lot of people make this kind of parallel between like venture capital and sort of what I do or what we do, venture philanthropy. And it does have similarities, but one of the differences is that in VC, there's the sense that you're going to come over and take over a company or put in your people, make it better, and then sell it on, basically, right? In the charity or social space, that's impossible because no one actually owns a charity, right? You don't own charity, even though some people might like to think they do, right? But some people can it takes time for them to realize. But like a charity isn't owned. The trustees are guardians of that organization, right? And so what you've got to do is empower people rather than come and tell them what to do, And so at NZF, that was one thing I was able to do, and especially with the families we were helping with as well. You can't kind of force growth. Basically, it has to happen on their terms. Mm-hmm. So and this is where grant making gets really interesting, because in grant making, there's a really strong power imbalance, right? Because essentially you've got people with the money and people who want your money, right? So it gets difficult because as a grant maker, let's put it as a grantee, you're passionate, you love what you do, you want to do something amazing, you haven't got the funding, these people who've got the money, the funder comes along and says can you do this X, Y, and Z? Frankly, you'll say anything you need to say that you think that they want to hear, because you can justify it, right? Because the greater good is I want to get this work done and help a bunch of people, and because of that power imbalance, grant makers can sometimes inadvertently like lead that organization in directions that they don't really want to go, or they're not really good at, or whatever it may be, you know? So one of the things I really wanted to do was like fix that in power imbalance and say, no, we're no better than you. We need you just as much as you need us, right? And we need to work together, and we need to be partners if we're going to make this work, you know? So that kind of empowering kind of relationship is critical. That kind of critical friend, really.
Yeah.
I'm here to support you, but you know, like, you do your thing. It's your show, you know.
I mean, you're preempting all my questions. On the power imbalance, it's really interesting that, like, one of the things that I've spoken to various sort of chief execs and things who've been on the podcast is around like how to ensure they're getting the gritty, real feedback that they need, because it's quite easy in that context to be surrounded by people who are saying yes to you a lot, or they want something from you, so they'll do exactly kind of what you want, like you've said. So how, I guess my question is, like, for grantees, you have a duty, because you know this, and like you're aware of this power imbalance, and you want to not have it. Like, if the default position of a grantee is, I'm just going to say what I need to say, like, you have to do something to stop them doing that. So how are you stopping that happening?
Yeah. Firstly, it's like, you know, it's trust-based relationships, right? So you've got to actually build a relationship which is genuine, right? So I'm a strong believer that in all your, you know, professional relationship, they've got to be genuine relationship, right? So, you know, I've got thank God, I've got 2 members of staff, right? So for a long time I was by myself, so that's quite exciting to me. But, you know, I genuinely, you know, you've got to build actual relationships, right? And yeah, there's a professional element to it, but, you know, they've got to be real. And so I think, going back to, you know, when I'm working with my venture leaders, those relationships have got to be real. So the idea is that over time, that trust allows them to kind of be open and be frank. And when things aren't going well and so on, they tell us. And what's also important to us, because one of the things we say to our funders is, we're going to report to you like at goals and KPIs level on a quarterly basis, right? So we actually have a very in-depth, detailed investment level reporting, and you're going to see oranges and reds in there. Get used to it, because that's life, right? That's how it works. And just like in your investment world, not all your investments go perfectly, you know. So we almost like, if you just all agree, we're going to get worried. Basically, that means you're something not right. So there is a bit of a, you know, there is an element of kind of trying to build those sort of trust-based relationships, really, to kind of with people, so people feel comfortable. But also, I am getting hands-on, so I do get to know what's going on in these organizations, right? So I get to know the team, I get a sense of what's happening. So we can kind of try to mitigate some of those kind of power imbalance issues.
Yeah. I mean, you've talked about patient funding. I think let's just dive into this a little bit. Like, if for a lot of charities that are sort of traditional, I guess, that you feel very progressive in what you're doing here. The donor will give some money, and there's sort of traditionally been a like, oh, you better be careful with my money, like use it very carefully. But here there's like this level of, you know, you're looking at reds and oranges, and it's not. But that's kind of what people are signing up for, I guess. Like, if the communication is done around, this is risky like an investment would be. What's your thinking on like patient funding and time versus the traditional sort of guardianship of the money?
So, like, when you look at traditional grant making, or well, maybe traditional grant makers will take offense to it, but, like, you know, the more common approach is that it's very transactional, basically, right? So I've got 100K a day. I love this project. I love this podcast you're doing. Okay, I'm going to give you 100K, and you're going to do this for. Out of that, I want 10 podcasts. You're not getting 10 grand.
It's a deal.
But, it's a deal. Yeah, you're doing 10 podcasts, and I want that done in 6 months. Okay, and when you do that, I want to know how many people you've reached. I want to know So it's very much that I bought something from you. It's very much service, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very kind of closed and restricted. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because there are situations in organizations where you do just want to deliver a project and you want some funding for it, and it's great. Come along. What happens though, unfortunately, is that as I mentioned earlier, people get to rely on this type of funding. Okay, and that's where we're saying we're not going to be those guys. When we invest into an organization, we're looking at 4 areas. We're looking at their systems, so like their governance, their financial management, all the boring stuff, basically, that other people love to do, right? So there's the governance stuff. Then there's the services. Like, do we enhance those services? Do we introduce new ones? And then there's a scale bit, like how do you reach more people? How do you grow? And finally, your financial sustainability. So we've got like a 4S model, basically. And the idea is that we tailor the grant so that it works across those areas, rather than saying we're going to just buy this lovely project and you carry on. So the idea is that it's a very much a kind of holistic grant, and that includes sometimes a grant to send the CEO off to go and do some training, send that person. So it's very much kind of getting involved to understand what's going on. Yeah.
Let's go on to like you and your thinking on leadership and things. So you've had various leadership roles. What do you think good leadership is?
Yeah, I was scared you're going to ask me that one. You know what?
It's a consistent one every episode.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm sure you get better answers elsewhere. Look, I think one thing I already mentioned is like genuine relationships. So like, I'd really believe that like you can, sometimes people have this like this is work Rizwan, and then there's this like family Rizwan, and then there's this like, I don't know, gym Rizwan, something like, you see what I mean, right? So it's like, for me, that's like an almost schizophrenic approach to life. I can't do that. I'm just going to be me wherever I am at all times. And of course, there's certain things in the professional environment which you do slightly differently. But that's the first thing. So wherever you're around, you kind of try to build those relationships which are genuine. Tell you what, the other thing was, I was thinking about this recently. So one of a good friend of mine, I call him a teacher. He's a Islamic scholar. He actually passed away about 3 weeks ago, right? And I was really really close to him, and he's an amazing guy. And I guess a few things about leadership I learned from him, which I think I've tried my best to kind of emulate. One is like, so he had this ability to sort of make anyone that was around him feel sort of special, like as though they were like, even though there were maybe 50 people in the room, each of them felt like he was talking to them directly. That kind of, and I think that's a really amazing skill to be able to have. That, because what's telling is that having him passed away, everyone said that. Everyone was like, he was my best friend. And he was like, someone who, whenever I was there, I was spending time, and it's because he was able to do that somehow with so many people,
What do you think the trick is? What's the magic there?
I mean, geez, if I knew, like, it's incredible because, you usually have a few close people who, you make feel special and you do anything for, right? But when you can kind of like multiply that to everyone, right? That's what's amazing, right? That kind of ability. I just think, those just spending time with people, having actual personal conversations and trying to really just be there, and it's really weird because people like that are in high demand, but somehow they have the time to respond to your WhatsApp and your text message, and and if you have a question, they'll be there for you, So I don't know, maybe God just gives them more time and more ability to just sort of respond. So that's definitely one thing that I learned from him. The other thing was, I guess, and maybe it's not a leadership thing, but one thing I learned was like, he always said to me, whenever there's something good happening, like some kind of good initiative coming along the way, like to jump on it as soon as you can, right? Because everything all good that comes from it in the future, you can kind of like bank, if that makes sense. So you were at the beginning of it. I think kind of subconsciously I brought that into the venture world, right? Where I was saying, if you've got these early ventures, these amazing people in the community. We've got child psychotherapists, we've got lawyers, all of these people who've got these amazing careers, and say, I'm gonna take a break and just serve the people around me. Like I want to be there early and say, how can I help you now? So that everything you do, I can like say, hey, I was part of that. Yeah? So yeah, there's just some kind of thoughts around leadership. Yes.
Yeah. I guess I've met a few people that have that same way of, like you feel like it's a one-to-one relationship kind of thing, and they might be having that with lots of people. Yeah, I don't know what it is.
I genuinely, when you work it out, let me know, because it's incredible. Yeah.
Grant making is kind of decision making by its very nature, I guess. It's an ambiguous one. How do you make good decisions?
Wonderful. You know what? So it's tough. I'll tell you what. One thing I think about grant making is like essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to generate impact for humans with money, right? So that's the art. It's an art form, right? It's like I've got this money, this private money. I want to make some difference to a certain bunch of people. Basically, how do I kind of make that happen? And so there's a bunch of decisions you've got to work out. Like, who are these people? Why these people? And what's the difference you want to make? And by the way, that's the biggest question that comes up a lot that you think would be easy to answer. Or when we asked our ventures, what's the difference you want to make to your beneficiaries? It's usually the hardest to answer because they just want to get on and do the work, basically, right? They know there's a problem and they want to make it better. And they know that their work is having some good effect. But if you ask them, what is the change you want to see? That's a bit harder to answer. So those are the sorts of things that we've got to do. I think for me, it's good decision making is about asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how do you know? Like, because you could make a bunch of decisions, but if you haven't asked the right ones, then the right questions, then basically you're making decisions which are sort of low impact.
Yeah, on the fly.
On the fly, and they're not necessarily getting to the heart of the problem.
Yeah. So when in that situation where like somebody is, they're working on a problem or a sort of a societal thing that does exist, but they're not able to easily answer that question of like, what is the change you're striving for? Are you sort of being like, come on, you got to figure this out. Like, you got to figure this out and be more specific.
Basically, that question is it's really funny. We used to ask this question even at NZF when we had these funders. So these grantees asking for funding. And one of the questions I put in the application form was like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Right? And it was really funny the amount of people that would respond and saying like, what problem? I've got, give me the money, that's the problem. Like, if I had more money, I would actually go and do this stuff. What I was trying to get at is, what is the actual problem you're trying to like respond to, in your community, right? And sometimes, so firstly, you've got to work that one out. What's the problem? Secondly is like, what's the difference you want to make? Because without knowing the answer to what difference you want to make, you can't measure impact. That makes sense, right? So there's a kind of, you're going in a sequence, right? So before you can say, well, what impact are you having? You've got to work out what impact you want to have, right? So that's the journey we take them on, basically, with our ventures. So usually through workshops and training and support and through specialists, we really get to the heart of what difference they want to make. Once we've defined that, then we can put systems in place to actually measure whether that's happening, right? Because one of the, whenever we ask ventures, give us impact data, right? So one of the things they almost always they'll give us is testimonials, right? Someone said this amazing thing about us, And that is impact data, but it's not objective data, right? It's basically people who loved what you do said something nice about what you do. But what you haven't done is asked everyone the same question, for example, and understood how many of people are saying that, that kind of thing. So I think those things are kind of important. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, I think
yeah, no, it's really good. One of the things that I think I learned from you, and I think you were behind all of this, is like the measurements at NZF on the sort of macro like numbers, seeing what was happening across the UK in it was very data driven. I feel like it's not, I've been worked in a bunch of charities, and it felt like quite a tech embracing, data embracing place, and I think a lot of that was down to you, and it was an impressive place from that front. I guess the question I've got is, what is your thoughts on impact measurements when you look across the charity sector?
When it comes to I mean, as I mentioned, so when you're small, you don't. It's a really annoying question to ask a small charity, like, show us your impact. By the way, all funders ask this, right? And it's so annoying for grantees, because it's like, I can just about run this thing, and you're asking me to do reporting and tell you about this wonderful survey I did at the end of the year, and that's a lesson for grant makers, by the way. Always allow some funding to support them to report back to you.
Yeah.
That's one of the key things we always forget as grant makers. Make sure you resource them to actually serve your requests as well, because they're not there to just serve you. So yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the larger charities, they are kind of complex. They've asked the right questions and kind of really understood that. But yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it's one of those things which tends to get kind of it's when it comes to impact measurement, I think you find that charities do it for the grant makers rather than for themselves, right? So they're really just ticking a box. They're saying, hey, you know what? You want to know this? All right, fine. Okay, I'll ask them. I'll ask them this question.
And what they get potentially is like something you submit as a PDF on an email and then put it in a drawer. But actually, what you want and like what it sounds like you're pushing for is, don't do this unless it's useful for you.
As the whole point of impact data is that it tells you, number one, are you actually making the difference you thought you wanted to make, right? Or you were trying to make. And B, to improve your services, right? Because hopefully some of the data will tell you, actually, I really didn't like this particular element of your service or this activity, or that's the whole point of impact data, right? To actually get that kind of solid objective feedback. But yeah, as I say, the grant makers have this way of like inadvertently, generally, I don't think they mean it, but what happens is they ask for stuff that grantees don't naturally have, and then they kind of almost artificially create that. I'm not saying they're lying about it; they go off and do it, but it's a tick box exercise. So, as you said, what I'm trying to do is build that competence and capacity right from the beginning. So that they understand why they need to do that right from the outset. By the way, and NZF is a really good example. Trying to implement an impact measurement framework on an already fully functioning service is much harder than if you just did it at the beginning.
You sure?
Right.
Yeah.
So you can just have those systems in place. So when you try and retrofit it on, it doesn't quite. It takes a lot of work, but yeah,
because the machine is bigger by that point, and it's just harder to embed the system.
And you don't know. You have to work out what point in that user journey you're actually going to ask those questions, right? And so it's just a bigger piece of work. But yeah,
how do you think that? Like, is there? Do you feel like there's progress being made across grant makers on this? And if not, how can that happen?
Well, I think look. When I look at the kind of the wider grant making landscape, there are some amazing charities spending a lot of and grant makers putting a lot of effort into sort of impact measurement and sharing of data. That's one of the key things. So like, it's one thing to collect all that data, but keep it inside your grant making charity, but the real kind of a lot of the power comes from saying to other grant makers, hey, this is what's happening. So when we give money like this, it actually has this impact, for example. So one of the things that's come out has been good, it's been spoken about for some years, is what happens when you give core funding, right? So you guys, going back to what I was saying earlier, grant makers like kind of a really kind of nicely packaged service that they're funding. But what happens if you don't do that and you give them just, here's 50K for your core costs. This is going to pay for your rent. This is going to pay for all the other stuff that just you need. Do you get more impact that way or not, right? And all the data says that it does, has way more impact because they know what they're doing. They know, and they don't have to always be worrying about, can we pay our rent? They've got that down and they can go off and do their work,
Yeah.
So I think that's a lesson from NZF, right? So we at NZF, most of our grants were just to individual families, right? People in need they just needed help, right? It was super clear that if we were really prescriptive about how they used like their zakat, then it really was highly restrictive, and they couldn't really kind of achieve what they wanted. If you gave them the money they needed and let them work it out, usually they'd be in a much better place. The impact would be much higher. So
it's also like it's a trust thing as well. It's not just an impact thing. It's like a dignity and trust thing. And I think that probably that applies to whether you're an individual falling on hard times or you're starting a project or running a project.
I'll give you one example actually. Very comes to mind at NZF. It was 2017 Grenfell fire. And as you know, 72 people lost their lives. And NZF wasn't really set up to go out there and kind of as a crisis type charity, but we actually ended up going out there and just essentially sort of giving cash grants out. What we saw was the community, Muslims, non-Muslims, everyone, supporting that community, survivors and people who are affected. The way they were doing that was really interesting. So they were giving them like cans of beans and like their old blankets, all in good faith, just whatever they could, because that's what they understood to be like what to do in a crisis. Give people what they need. But these guys were half a mile from the biggest shopping center in Europe, right? So actually, it was so much more effective and not only impactful, as you said, but that dignity to say, don't go around looking for these jogging bottoms to find your size. Here's £200. Go and get yourself what you want. And go and buy yourself what you want to eat and do your thing basically. And I think this is where that, as you said, that humanity, that kind of dignity and honor is just absolutely critical. And I think that comes from from an Islamic position. The zakat is about kind of moving ownership onto the person who needs it, right? And interestingly, when zakat is received, it ceases to be zakat. It's just money, right? So they can do what they want with it. That's their money, And I think that's really important. I think that's part of like the wisdom behind it.
Yeah. So one of the questions I've got, I'm intrigued. So we've talked about, and my work in like international development, a lot around this is I feel like there's real progress being made in cash grants and cash distribution. But I want to ask like the sort of opposite question, which is, so we've talked about when money helps. When does money hurt? And what have you learned about like the sort of, if there's negative dynamics of giving money in some cases? I know that's very broad, but I wanted to ask the sort of other side of that.
There are times where, a few times. One is like when you're dealing with, going back to National Zakat Foundation, there were times we did not give cash grants to the person. Why? Because we felt that they may not use it very well. They may have issues, whether it's substance issue, whatever it may be. So we would pay for whatever they needed, and they would get it. So there are times where giving cash for kind of an individual can be a bad idea. In the grant making world, there is, believe it or not, such a thing as overburdening a charity with funding. It happens. So when you're a small charity, if you don't have the systems in place to manage significant funds, right? What ends up happening is that usually, the way I describe it is like they're just a sieve. So when you pour that money in, most of it just comes out the other side in whatever they were doing, basically. But what you've got to do, which is what Fund is good is trying to do, is kind of fill those gaps, right? So that when that money goes in, actually it has impact, it actually holds weight, and it's sustainable, right? So there are times that, you don't, you've got to do that. And yeah, I think, especially in the international space, you just want to pay for services, right? You want to actually fund things. I guess what's interesting is that we are using grants, but not giving it to the organization. We're using it sometimes for consultants to work with those organizations, right? So again, if you ask most charities, what do you need? What's the number one thing they'll say is money. Okay, we just need more money so we can do more good stuff, right? Which isn't wrong, but my experience has been that sometimes money isn't actually all they need, and sometimes it's not what they need at all. What they need is someone to come and support them to rethink their strategy, for example, or put in certain governance systems in place so that they make better decisions, or someone that's going to come in and look at how they fundraise and look at other ways to generate income, right? Yeah. That capacity building is far more valuable to that organization than just giving them a cash grant.
Yeah, because ultimately it sets them up to be able to sort of effectively use larger money, but you need to do this bit first to then use the money to have the biggest impact you can have. But so yeah, I could see that. Like you're blocking the sieve before you then fill the sieve.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Yeah. Talk to me about like taking risks. How do you view failure in the context of grant making?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think as I mentioned before, you can fill up, you can cover the gaps in the holes in the sieve as much as you like, right? But you can't take into account everything, right? And we're dealing with humans and life, right? The main thing is you're dealing with humans who are super complex, right? And those are the people who are leading these organizations, right? And so you can't, I think it's a big mistake to kind of have that overly commercial kind of approach where you say, well, I paid for this service, and if I don't get that service, well, then, as though like you're going to take them to court over it. The point is you're as partners supporting them, empowering them. So, failure is part of, all of our lives. And we've just got to support each other to kind of get over them, right? So it goes back to the point on that patient funding. Like, we may have a quarter or 2 or 5 which just didn't go well, okay? The point is, did we learn from it? Did we learn from it, and are we going to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Yes. Well, then we've grown, we built capacity. That's what we're trying to do. So we've got to have that. For me, that's absolutely critical, and I would encourage my grant-making colleagues to, to kind of take that on as much as they can, because it's hard, and you're more likely to get honest answers as well, right? So grantees are more likely to tell you, hey, you know what, we messed up last quarter. That thing we tried to do did not work. You'd rather hear that than some weird report which is obviously false and asking for more money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Is patient funding a funders in good term, like, or is this a popular sort of terminology?
It's not a fig term. It's out there. This idea that there's patient funding. I mean, it's like I suppose in the commercial world, it's like a patient loan, you'd call it, right? The idea is that here's some money, give it back when you can, sort of thing. Although we're a bit different, you'd be kind of say keep it. But the idea is that we understand that things aren't always going to go perfectly, but we're going to be around, basically.
Yeah, it's just a really nice term. Like I think it's like like we're here for you over the long term kind of thing. Like I almost want you to trademark patient funding.
Maybe we should. But it's also really about just visibility. Like, when you know with confidence that as long as I do my bit, there's going to be funding for the next 5 years. Like, that's a completely different mindset to saying, I have no idea whether I'm going to have my job next year because the funder might or might not be happy with me,
Which also lets you, like, as a sort of a builder of these things, like, there are things that you can do in 5 years that you can't do if you're only looking a year ahead. So if you have the confidence to be like, right, by 2030, here's where we want to be, and you have the confidence that you're able to get there time-wise, like, imagine that the impacts that you have must be massively in sort of the chances of that impact happening must be hugely increased.
Absolutely. I think it's like one of the things we're trying to do is build institutions rather than just ventures, right? So, the idea is that these are institutional players. These become entities and organizations which are resilient and impact, right? So when there is a change in leadership, it's all right because there's a board that knows how to handle that and it goes on to the next thing. We've got a strategic goal, which is that by 2035, so 10 years' time, we would have backed 10 best-in-class institutions led by Muslims, for the Muslim community and for society at large. So we know that if that's what we want to be in 10 years' time, we're going to have to start now, and we're going to have to take our time to build up these organizations from the bottom up, and put those systems in place so that they can actually get there. But we need to give them that visibility. You can't build an institution on, like 6 months of funding and hope for the next 6 months after that,
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot, traditionally there's been like charities who, like you said at the start, like are so reliant on these project to project funding type things that they almost become a charity that my friend once told me, like, if somebody was doing he worked in a charity where 1 week it would be like, we support sheep farmers in Wales, and then another week it'd be like something completely different, because it's the only way for them to survive was to sort of hunt around like that.
Exactly. That's what funders don't realize. It happens a lot, right? So grant makers don't realize it, but they are basically shaping what an organization does because they're buying what they want, rather than saying to them, what do you want to do? What are you best at, and let's try and invest into that, so that it's called like mission drift, basically, right? So if you put yourself in a leadership role in a small organization, struggling, going from funding to funding, a funder comes along and says, let's say I don't know, you run a cat shelter, right? And you want to you're just, as you said, struggling. A funder comes along and says, I can help you, but we don't really want to do cats. We want to do dogs, right? And here's 100 grand, basically. Here's another 100 grand to, take on 100 dogs over the next year, whatever, right? Now, what you do is you find, because you're so struggling, even though you have no interest in working with these dogs, right? You might, I don't know. But what ends up happening is that you'll inadvertently you'll find some link between working with dogs and what you wanted to do. But help animals, right? Pets, good thing. It's not a bad thing, helping dogs, right? So what ends up happening, you do it, right? And then over time, what you end up realizing, people find out, these guys handle dogs. Let's give them some. Before you know it, you're this animal, cat and dog charity. Right?
It's a self-fulfilling cycle
There are charities out there who have like no idea where they're going, but they're being led by where the money is.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm not saying they're doing bad work. They're doing good work, but they've lost their focus, basically. They're not really sure where they're going anymore.
Yeah. So you're building a Rizwan charity that's just, you're building a board of trustees to help guide your own personal life. I'm getting at mentors, influences. Who are you putting on there?
Oh, wow. No. Okay. I mean, Just thinking about who I would want around me, it's just, the first one was the guy that I mentioned a little bit earlier. He's no longer with us, but I'd love to have him, definitely love to have him back, guiding what I do. And there's also Iqbal Naseem. I think you know him. He was former CEO of National Zakat Foundation. He really taught me a lot about leadership. So I'd definitely have him around. Who else would I have? You know what?
I've met him a couple of times. Is he part of the founding team of Funders in Good?
That's right. Yeah, he's one of the founders. Yeah, he's more of an advisor now. But yeah, he's founder. You know who gives me really good advice? Or asked really some of the best questions are probably my kids. Right? The stuff that they come up with at night is just mad. Right? So I would definitely have those kind of innocent, no baggage type questions from them, because they ask me the stuff which is like, oh, wait a second, you're right. Like, what the hell? Why am I doing this? So they're little why questions, right? And we don't ask ourselves enough why questions. So I probably have those kind of people around me if I could.
Yeah, amazing. A phone company comes to you and says, we're going to facilitate a text message to every charity professional facing funding challenges. So you have to, within the constraints of a text message character limit, what are you saying to those people?
Oh, wow. Well, look, I'm a grant maker, right? So, in that context, I would be saying to them, I understand what you're trying to achieve in the long term, okay, and find the right funder who believes in you and believes in what you do, and approach them rather than going to randoms and trying to kind of raise the next buck, because you might find money, you might end up in the wrong destination.
I love that. That's like 3 text messages. That'll be fun.
You used to be able to connect them up. WhatsApp. It's a WhatsApp.
Thank you so much for this. This has been super interesting. The one of the things I would like to do for everybody is there anything you want to say that's on your mind that we've not spoken about? Just a bit of a space for you. Thinking of, I guess the audience is charity sector professionals. Anything on your mind?
No, look, I think I've covered most things. I think it's just I guess one thing we didn't kind of really go into much was the experience of the British Muslim community in this world of grant making, you know. And so one thing we because grant making has been going for many years, hundreds of years actually, Muslims have come somewhat new to it, and so one of the challenges faced by Muslim projects is accessing grants from mainstream grant makers, right? So that happens quite a lot. And there's various reasons for it. There is sometimes a perception issue of what's going on? Do I really want to back this Muslim charity? Are they trying to make everyone Muslim? Or, so that's a major misconception, because most Muslim charities are just doing social services. They just happen to be led by Muslims or led by their faith, if you like, right? And also Muslims, as it's a new space, grant makers, believe it or not, we've got our own little vocabulary, we've got our own little clique. You got to know each other. It does help to know each other. And we speak in we've got our own, we've got our own thing going on. What we find is that grantees who can speak our language get the money. They're not necessarily the best people to back.
Yeah.
Right? Because what they've done is they've just learned. It's like those people who are amazing in interviews, but probably rubbish and stuff's going to happen, right? So it's just, what you got to do is work a little bit harder and reach those organizations, which may be a little bit rough around the edges. Maybe don't say all the perfect words, but just look at what the work they're doing, because they're doing amazing stuff on the ground. So I guess that's just a bit of advice to my colleagues out there that, there's some amazing stuff going on, and I would love to kind of support in connecting those things up.
Yeah. That is what a great metaphor of that sort of interview the person who's great at interviews, like the person who gets, there's nothing wrong with the person who comes to an interview, gets nervous, has a bad interview, but then goes off and is doing amazing work.
The amount of time that's happened, though, someone's absolutely flunked it. Like, you know what? Give them a go.
Yeah.
And they've been brilliant, because I don't need them to be good at interviews. They need to be good at their jobs, right?